before the algorithms crowned them kings, before the tractors gleamed under drone shots and millions gathered around harvest seasons they would never touch, there was silence. There was debt stacking quietly on kitchen tables, hands cracked by labor that never promised applause, and the inherited fear that the land itself might one day turn against those sworn to protect it. These 5 farming channels did not rise from trend cycles or viral luck. They emerged from exhaustion, from generational pressure, from the slow terror of watching a way of life inch toward extinction in real time. Each creator carried a private wound, fear of failure, guilt of legacy, the loneliness of working land while the world moved digital, and unknowingly placed it under the harshest spotlight imaginable. Cameras did not just record crops and cattle. They exposed identity, pride, and survival itself. What happens when farming stops being just work and becomes performance? When tradition collides with monetization? When millions watch, but the soil still demands blood, sweat, and sacrifice? This is not the story of YouTube success. It is the story of 5 lives standing between the past and the future, asking a question none of them were ready to answer. What does it cost to save the land when the world is watching? The land was never quiet, even when it appeared so. It breathed in long, patient rhythms. Wind pressing through tall grass, metal gates groaning at dawn, boots crunching against frozen soil before the sun had fully decided to rise. Long before subscriber counts, before thumbnails and titles, 5 future creators moved through this world unnoticed, shaped by routines older than any algorithm. Childhood did not arrive gently. It arrived with instructions. Wake early. Finish chores. Do not complain. The land did not care about excuses, and neither did the people who depended on it. Inside modest farmhouses, the air was often heavy with unspoken arithmetic. Numbers that lived behind the eyes of parents staring at bills laid flat across kitchen tables. Loans. Weather losses. Repairs postponed one more season. The children watched quietly, absorbing tension without language for it. They learned early that fear could be inherited, passed down as efficiently as property lines. Failure here was not abstract. It had weight. It echoed. One bad season could erase decades of effort, and everyone knew it. School was a pause, not an escape. While classmates dreamed outward, these children returned home to work that demanded presence, strength, and silence. Hands hardened before adolescence had time to soften them. Identity formed not through choice, but repetition. Day after day, the same motions carved a future that felt narrow, inevitable. Farming was not introduced as an option, it was presented as continuity, a responsibility stitched directly into bloodlines. Yet beneath the discipline lived something fragile and rarely acknowledged. In quiet moments, standing alone in fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon, an unspoken fear surfaced, a question without a voice. What if this life, so demanding and so unseen, was disappearing? What if all this effort was preserving something the world no longer valued? The land asked for everything but gave no guarantees in return. The digital world existed only as distant noise, something for cities, for other lives. Screens were tools, not stages. Cameras were for documentation, not confession. None of them imagined that one day a lens would become a bridge between isolation and survival. That strangers would one day understand the weight of mud on boots, the exhaustion behind routine, the quiet pride buried beneath restraint. Still, something was already taking root. Not ambition, but awareness. The sense that these stories, these lives lived in silence, might vanish if left untold. That tradition without witness could fade unnoticed. As adolescence gave way to adulthood, pressure intensified. Expectations tightened. The future loomed closer, heavier. Leaving felt like betrayal. Staying felt like suffocation. And somewhere between rows of crops and inherited obligation, a silent question hardened into permanence. Was preserving this life worth sacrificing everything else? The land did not answer. It never did. It only waited, patient, demanding, and indifferent, forcing them to carry the weight of the question alone, unaware that it would one day follow them far beyond these fields. The decision to turn the camera on did not arrive with confidence. It arrived quietly, almost apologetically, slipped into life between feeding schedules and equipment repairs. For each of the 5 creators, the moment looked different, but the feeling was the same. A hesitation, a pause, a private doubt that lingered just before pressing record. The land had always been watched by the sky, by seasons, by generations before them. But being watched by people, by strangers, felt unnatural, even dangerous. Early footage carried the weight of uncertainty. Shaky frames, long silences, voices unsure whether they were allowed to speak. There was no performance yet, no polish. Just fields at dawn, engines coughing to life, hands moving out of habit rather than intention. The camera became a silent witness, absorbing exhaustion without judgment. At first, it felt pointless. Views barely moved. Days passed without acknowledgement. Yet something subtle shifted. The act of recording changed how isolation felt. The work was still lonely, but it was no longer invisible. As weeks turned into months, comments began to appear. Simple words, recognition, gratitude from people who had never stepped onto a farm but felt something stir when watching one. The creators felt it too, an unfamiliar warmth quickly followed by fear. Attention was a fragile thing, could disappear without warning, could demand more than it gave. Still, hope crept in quietly, threading itself through skepticism. But filming came at a cost. Time is currency on the land, and the camera demanded its share. Moments once private became documented. Mistakes once absorbed quietly, now lived forever. The creators felt a tension forming between preserving authenticity and protecting dignity, between telling the truth and oversharing it. Some nights ended not with rest, but with editing screens glowing in dark rooms, faces illuminated by exhaustion rather than satisfaction. Growth brought relief but also guilt. As subscriber numbers climbed, a question surfaced that none of them were ready to confront. Was farming still the center of their lives, or was content quietly reshaping it? Sponsorship offers appeared, each one carrying both opportunity and suspicion. Accepting them felt like compromise. Declining them felt reckless. The balance between survival and integrity grew thinner with every upload. Internally, conflict deepened. They worried about perception, about becoming entertainers rather than caretakers of the land, about disappointing parents who had never needed validation from strangers, about explaining success that came not from yield, but from views. The land still demanded labor, but now so did an invisible audience that never slept. Yet walking away no longer felt possible. The channel had become more than documentation. It was insurance. It was survival. It was proof that this life still mattered to someone, somewhere. Turning off the camera felt like stepping backward into obscurity, and obscurity felt like extinction. Standing alone in barns after dark, surrounded by familiar sounds that suddenly felt heavier, each creator faced the same unspoken realization. Growth was no longer optional. The camera had changed everything, and there was no way to undo it. They had pressed record to survive. Now they had to decide what they were willing to become to keep going. And the land, as always, waited silent, while the stakes quietly rose. The moment they crossed into mass visibility, the silence changed shape. It no longer lived in empty fields or long drives between properties. It followed them online, hiding beneath millions of views, disguised as noise. Their channels were no longer just personal windows into rural life. They had become symbols. To some, they represented authenticity in a manufactured world. To others, they were spokespeople for an entire industry they never volunteered to defend. The weight of that projection settled slowly, then all at once. Every upload carried expectation. Audiences debated their decisions as if the land were theoretical, as if weather could be negotiated in comment sections. A broken machine became evidence of incompetence. A necessary cull became moral controversy. Praise arrived loudly, but criticism arrived sharper, more personal. The creators learned quickly that visibility did not equal understanding. Millions watched, but very few truly listened. Fame fractured time. Days blurred into production cycles. The land still demanded dawn starts and physical endurance, But the audience demanded consistency, explanation, presence. Missed uploads sparked concern, speculation, anger. Burnout hid behind productivity, masked as dedication. Smiles in thumbnails contrasted with eyes dulled by exhaustion. Anxiety grew quietly, often unnoticed until it was unavoidable. In private moments, the creators questioned themselves. Had they invited this pressure? Had they turned something sacred into spectacle? They felt torn between two worlds that refused to merge cleanly. Offline, the land remained unforgiving and real. Online, reality bent under interpretation, stripped of context and consequence. The fear of irrelevance returned, stronger than before. Algorithms shifted unpredictably. Loyalty felt temporary. One bad decision could erase years of work. Loneliness intensified. Fame isolated rather than connected. Friends hesitated to speak honestly. Family struggled to understand a success that felt intangible. The creators stood surrounded by attention, yet emotionally untouched by it. The camera captured everything, but nothing it captured could absorb the weight they carried. Sleep grew shallow. Minds raced. The pressure to perform authenticity became its own contradiction. They were expected to be raw, but resilient. Honest, but uncontroversial. Human, but unbreakable. The land never demanded perfection, only effort. The audience demanded both. In barns lit by single bulbs, engines cooling after long days, the creators felt the truth settle in. Success had not solved their fear. It had multiplied it. The higher they climbed, the more fragile everything beneath them felt. And somewhere between applause and exhaustion, a quiet realization took hold. If this continued unchecked, something would break. They just didn't know what yet. The breaking point did not announce itself. It arrived disguised as routine. A machine failure that cost more than expected. A season that turned cruel without warning. A body that finally resisted the strain placed upon it. One by one, fractures appeared, small at first, then impossible to ignore. The land reminded them who was in control. For some, it was financial pressure resurfacing with familiar cruelty. For others, it was public backlash. Misinterpreted moments spreading faster than truth could follow. Health scares forced pauses they had never allowed themselves. Upload schedules collapsed. Cameras went dark, not as strategy but necessity. In the absence of content, silence returned. But this time it was heavier. Guilt rushed in to fill the space. Guilt toward audiences who waited. Toward sponsors who expected deliverables. Toward families who watched them unravel under a weight that was never meant to be carried alone. Most of all, guilt toward the land, neglected, rushed, filmed instead of felt. Identity cracked. Were they farmers who happened to share their lives, or performers maintaining an illusion of control? The question haunted them. Some considered quitting entirely. Walking away from the camera felt like betrayal, but staying felt like erasure of self. The line between purpose and pressure blurred dangerously. In rare moments of stillness, clarity emerged. Not as relief but as truth. The realization that the channel was never meant to replace the land. That the story mattered but not more than survival. That authenticity required boundaries, even if algorithms punished them. The land, indifferent and constant, offered no comfort, but it offered grounding. Dirt under fingernails. Familiar weight. Honest exhaustion. Slowly, painfully, priorities reordered themselves. From collapse came resolve not to chase growth but to reclaim meaning. Yet uncertainty lingered. The damage was done. Trust felt fragile. Momentum broken. The question remained unanswered. Could they rebuild without losing everything they had built? The harvest had failed, but the season was not over. What endured was not perfection but intention. The creators returned differently. Slower. More deliberate. The camera no longer led. It followed. Boundaries replaced obsession. The land reclaimed its place at the center, not as content but as purpose. Their channels evolved, reflecting not just farming, but humanity. Vulnerability entered the frame. Not performative but honest. Viewers responded, not with numbers alone, but with understanding. The creators stopped trying to represent everyone. They chose instead to represent truth. Legacy took shape quietly. Young viewers discovered farming not as punishment, but as possibility. Awareness spread beyond entertainment, into respect. The creators became bridges between worlds that rarely spoke to one another. Not influencers, but witnesses. The land remembered their mistakes. It always did. But it also bore witness to resilience, to adaptation, to survival under scrutiny. Their story did not end. It never could. Farming is cyclical. So is purpose. And as seasons turned, one truth remained rooted deep in the soil. The land survives when someone is willing to stand for it, seen or unseen. The question now belonged to the future.